Air Warriors, and welcome to another episode of Chevrons, a podcast for the enlisted force. I'm Command Chief Master Sergeant Sean Sullivan.
And I am Technical Sergeant Jay Whitaker. With us today is we have Command Sergeant Major Campbell. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing awesome this morning. Thanks for asking. Thanks for having me on the show today.
No problem. And I'm going to start with the first question, Sergeant Major, because half our audience is going to be going, Sergeant Major, wait, Air Force podcast, who is this person? Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, give us your background, your military assignments, and just a bit of who you are.
So where do I start? Sergeant Major Campbell. So I'm currently serving as the State Command Sergeant Major and Senior Enlisted Leader for the Adjutant General of the Massachusetts National Guard. So obviously that encompasses both the Army Guard and the Air Guard within Massachusetts. I am a Massachusetts Guardsman, nation's first. Been in the Massachusetts Guard for over 40 years. I enlisted when I was a senior in high school. Still going to high school and decided that I wanted to be involved in aviation some way, somehow, because I had gotten my private pilot's license while I was in school. So I enlisted in the Guard and went into Army aviation as an aircraft engine mechanic down on Cape Cod at then Camp Edwards. And so spent most of my Guard career in the aviation community. Worked my way up through every rank, had every position. Was a first sergeant for the maintenance company. Deployed back in 2005 for the first time, and then came back. Got selected for sergeant major. Became the battalion command sergeant major for the aviation battalion. And then worked my way up. Over the last several years, it's like I decided to make myself a little uncomfortable and stretch myself a little bit. So while I was still a member of the Massachusetts National Guard, I took a couple of active duty tours. My first one, I served as a senior enlisted advisor for the Deputy Commanding General out at U.S. Army Pacific and spent 3 years out there working Guard equities, right, with the USARPAC commander. And his staff. From there, I got selected to go into the Sergeant Major Academy Fellowship Program, where, thanks to some senior NCOs in the Army sent 20 of us that year, that cohort 4, 20 of us to Penn State to earn our master's degrees in adult education, with a promise that I would serve 2 years as an instructor at the Sergeant Major Academy. So. After graduating from Penn State University, I served 2 years as an instructor in the Joint Department, Joint Interagency Multinational Operations. And then from there, I got a phone call from the Command Senior Enlisted Leader at U.S. Southern Command, NCO that I'd worked with out at USARPAC, knew some of the things that we had done from the Guard perspective and from an enlisted leader development perspective. And he was now the Command Senior Enlisted Leader at Southern Command. And he was trying to stand up a program with our partners and allies in South America. So he called me up and said, I'd love to have you come down. So I worked for him for a year, built that program, and that's when the Adjutant General, General Keefe, reached out and said he wanted me to consider interviewing for the position back here in the state. So here I am. 6 months ago, I moved back to Massachusetts to make my wife and my family happy. Right? They're good to be back in Massachusetts, although I'm not liking the cold so much, but we'll get there.
So Massachusetts over Hawaii.
That wasn't my choice. It was, I had my choice. Maybe Hawaii was a little bit better, but.
And I just want to, because a lot of our audience members might not understand some of the hierarchies of the different relationships. So, Command Sergeant Major is the equivalent of a Command Chief in the Air National Guard. And for understanding for our Massachusetts listeners, and if there are other listeners from out of state, most states run the same way, where you're going to have a Command Sergeant Major that would be working with the Brigadier General, that is the land component commander, and you're going to have a Command Chief Master Sergeant that's going to be working with the air component commander for the air assets, and then you have it's called the SEL, the Command Senior Enlisted Leader that works directly for the TAG, and that's a joint position, and it is currently being held by Sergeant Major Campbell. So in our working relationship, we have the land component commander, who is Command Sergeant Major Pouliot, and then we have myself, and then we have Command Sergeant Major Campbell. So it ends up being a synergistic team. All the three of us working together. We have our, Sergeant Major Pouliot and I have our focuses on the Air and Army side, where the Sergeant Major has his focus on the development and the advancement of the entire National Guard. And that's why we thought it was a great opportunity to have him here, because enlisted development is enlisted development. Developing yourself as a leader is the same whether you are wearing your nameplate that says United States Army, United States Air Force, Coast Guard, Marine, Space Force. It matters not. It is the same. The same principles apply. So again, thank you for being here.
And Chief, you bring up some good points too, and I just want to add a little bit to that. You talked about your relationship with General Gaglio and Sergeant Major Pouliot's relationship with General Kalin, my relationship with the Adjutant General, General Keefe. But we see this enlisted officer relationship at all levels across the Department of Defense today, not just in the Army and Air Force, not just in the National Guard. And it really starts at that platoon level, where you've got that new second lieutenant who's coming in and taking, in the Army side, it's a platoon, and the Air Force side, probably a section where you've got that lieutenant in charge, but yet you've got a senior non-commissioned officer, probably at the E6, E7 level, right, that's got way more experience than that lieutenant does, and that's helping shape and groom that lieutenant, as they're growing in their careers, right, to be commanders, because that's the difference. NCOs generally speaking, don't have command authority unless our commanders have given it to us, whereas we can help shape those commanders and we can help guide those commanders to make good decisions for our soldiers and airmen.
Yeah, and in our enlisted force structure in the Air Force, it actually spells out that senior enlisted leaders are there to help mentor, lead, and guide your company grade officers. But the really cool thing is how the relationship, you go from guiding and mentoring and assisting your company grade officers, and then as you continue to build those relationships, you really become a key advisor. Because I know that General Gaglio includes me in a lot. She appreciates the enlisted voice. I know every wing commander appreciates the same. So it begins being exercised for those leaders out there. You could be a tech sergeant, you could be a master sergeant, you could be working with a brand new second lieutenant, first lieutenant, or a captain. That's where you learn how to build these relationships. That's where you learn how to build these functionalities and gain those trusts back and forth. And as you develop through the ranks, you never lose that connection between the command authority of your officers and your ability to be there as a wise counsel on the enlisted side. What are some of the things that you're coming into your office with? Now, you've been in place about 6 months. It's given you time to kind of look at the landscape. Where are your priorities? Where are your focus areas gravitating to now?
It's a great question. And it's not the first time somebody's asked me my priorities. As a senior enlisted leader, my boss's priorities are my priorities, right? And that's how every senior enlisted leader should look at it. So when I look at, my priorities, I look at the Adjutant General. So his priorities are field winning teams, invest in our people, build enduring relationships, and encourage innovation. Those are his priorities. So, when I look at it, so what do I want to focus on is how can I help him get after those priorities, and how can I help the National Guard, the Massachusetts National Guard, achieve those objectives that the Adjutant General wants to. Right, and so when I look at it, and this is a conversation he and I had when he decided to take a chance on me and bring me back to Massachusetts, was really looking at it from a leader development perspective, and not just how to sending soldiers to school, getting your airman leadership school, getting your basic leader course, your advanced leader course, right? But it's about career progression. It's about how do we grow our non-commissioned officers so that when they become the next, command chief, state command chief, or the next, state command sergeant major, or even the next battalion command sergeant major, or group command chief. Are they prepared, right? Kind of getting back to what you were saying earlier. It's like, are they prepared to be a good advisor to that commander, right? Are they able to connect, that commander's vision and that commander's intent, right? Translate it for their soldiers and airmen, so that the soldier and airman down at the grassroots, at the basic level, understands why they're doing a task or why they're doing a mission, and what's the bigger picture. Looking at it from a National Guard perspective, and I'm not ashamed to admit it, right? 40 years in the National Guard, and Chief Sullivan, you and I have talked about this a couple of times since I've been back here in the state. Had I not stretched myself over the last 10 years to go out and do some things, the Massachusetts National Guard, right? Every National Guard, but Massachusetts National Guard has a role in the National Defense Strategy and the National Security Strategy, and the defense strategy and the goals and objectives of the Governor of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So we as Guardsmen, right, especially us as senior enlisted leaders, need to understand what our role is, so that we know that our commanders and their intent is getting after those objectives, and we can provide them some sound advice, so that we can translate it for our soldiers and airmen, so that they understand why we're doing it, and it gives them that so what, because the Department of Defense, the Army today, right? The Army, the Air Force today is not the Army or the Air Force that you and I enlisted in. Where 40 years ago, when that drill sergeant or that platoon sergeant said, private, do this, and you just went to rigid attention and you said, yes, Sergeant, I'll go do that. Soldiers and airmen today want to understand why, and it's okay, right? There's nothing wrong with giving that soldier or airman the why. Why are we doing this, right? How does it fit into the bigger picture? And it kind of goes back to the conversation we had earlier today with the wing commander, that when our soldiers and airmen see the fruits of their labor, when they see the results of what they've done and how it impacts things in the state, in the Commonwealth, in the nation, right? It kind of gives them that sense of satisfaction, and it brings them back to work tomorrow, right, to continue to serve.
It's that impact, and that's one of the things that I want to message to the airmen that are listening. It is the impacts that you can make that give you that inner sense of belonging, that make you feel that joy of wearing this uniform, because you made a difference. And what better way to continue to make a difference than to do exactly what you just said, getting out of your comfort zone. It could not have been an easy decision to turn around and to take assignment and to move halfway across the globe as a Massachusetts National Guardsman who loved the Commonwealth. I mean, it took you away from your love of aviation, but it allowed you to develop and to move further into further your career, but further develop yourself as a human being, as a soldier, as a guardsman. What advices could you give to some of our younger listeners, some of our people that are in that E1, E4, maybe E4, E6 range, who are not going to have that opportunity to go be a first sergeant or command sergeant major somewhere? What can they start doing to start developing themselves, getting out of that comfort zone, and increasing their impact?
Yeah, so I actually, Chief, I'd like to take that kind of a two-part question. So and I'm going to say E1 to E4. Your priority at the E1 to E4 level is get good at your job, whatever that job is. Whether you're a defender, whether you're an aircraft mechanic, whether you're an infantryman, whatever that job is, get good at that job. All right. Once you're good at that job, then and I'll encourage service members, and I always have, right. It's a phrase, especially I used when I was teaching at the academy, was once you hit that non-commissioned officer rank, right, get comfortable being uncomfortable. Right? It's hard. It's very hard. We're human beings, and human beings want to have predictability. We want to have routine. We just are. It's human nature. I mean, I spent 30 years as an investigator understanding human nature, right? So once you hit that non-commissioned officer rank, E1, E4, get good at your job. Once you hit that non-commissioned officer rank, get comfortable being uncomfortable. So, when I came into the Army, 40 years ago, it was always don't volunteer for anything. Right? That was always kind of the message that we were given as young privates. Don't volunteer for nothing, right?
Yep.
But today, that's bad advice. Volunteer for new experiences. For all soldiers and airmen, it's like there are days that I wish I had a first sergeant or a platoon sergeant 30 years ago that kicked young Specialist Campbell or young Buck Sergeant Campbell in the butt, saying, "Hey, get out of aviation, go try something different." Right? Go try new experiences and do something that you haven't done before. Right? I didn't have that. Right? And so now when I talk to soldiers and airmen today, once you're good at your job, if you want to go try something different, go try something different. Right? Go try a new experience. Because if when you do that, when you go try something new and you stretch yourself and you stretch your ability, you become a better individual. And if you become a better individual, we get a better organization. Right? And that's the way to look at it. And one thing I will say, and I learned this, over the last 10 years, working with our Coast Guard partners, one of the things that there's a part of me that wishes we would do this across the DoD is take a page from the Coast Guard playbook. What I learned is when a Coast Guardsman enlists, they don't get rated when they come in. They go to basic training and then they get assigned to a unit. Now, like for a soldier, they go to basic, go to AIT. They enlisted for a specific job. Same thing in the Air Force. And you go to your tech school and you come back and you start doing that job. Well, that job you got is probably what the quota was that the recruiter had, and maybe not necessarily what you wanted to do when you first walked into the recruiter's office. And that's not a slam on the recruiters in any way, shape, or form, because the recruiters, they really do try to match what you want to do with what our needs are, right? But the Coast Guard playbook, what they do is, so that Coastie graduates from basic training and they go to a unit. And they get an opportunity for a period of time, and I forget how long it was, to try different jobs within that unit. And then they decide, hey, this is what I really want to do, right? And then they go and get rated, and they go to school and get the rating for that particular career field. I would love to be able to do some in-depth analysis on that to see if their retention is better, if their job satisfaction is better. I don't know. I would think that it probably would be, because now it's not a, like I said, 40 years ago I walked into a recruiter's office saying I wanted to be an aircraft mechanic, and so I was an engine mechanic. I was a jet engine mechanic, and that, I'm not saying it was or it wasn't, but that may not have been in my head when I walked into the recruiter's office. I knew I wanted aviation. I knew I wanted aviation maintenance. But they sold me an engine mechanic slot. And I had a great time doing it, don't get me wrong. But maybe there was something else in aviation that I might have liked more. I don't know.
That's interesting. I had no idea the Coast Guard did that way.
I didn't either until I was out at Sector Honolulu talking to a bunch of Coasties, and it was actually I was talking to one junior Coast Guardsman that was at the time was working one of the small boats, and I asked him, I said, what do you do? And that's when I kind of got the story. And he said he was getting ready to go to PAO school, to go to public affairs specialist school, because that's what he wanted to do. He spent a little bit of time in the public affairs shop in Sector Honolulu, and that's where he wanted to go into public affairs and help sell the Coast Guard message.
I like that guy.
I like how they do it at that level, like in the Air Guard. So we have members here at the 102nd, at the 104th, whatever wing that's here listening. And you enlist in, and you go to your job, and you go to your tech school, and you're doing it for a couple of years, and your job satisfaction is low, and it's not a good fit for you. We have vehicles at that point where you can go to your career advisors, or you can go to your retention recruiting manager within your wing and say, hey, what's available? Hey, do you want to do that? So we do have it, but it seems like it's like after the fact. So you already have several years invested into something that that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, and it's a good point, because we do, and that's and it's across DoD, but I think we probably do a little bit better a job of it in the Guard. If we do put a soldier or airman into a position that they're either not quite fit for that job, or they don't like that job or whatever, and so they can give them an opportunity to reclassify and go do something different. Yeah, I think we do a better job of that in the Guard than our active duty brothers and sisters do. But that is an opportunity, especially at the junior level.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. Especially at the harder for guys that are as old as you and me, Chief.
Well, I was not at the first muster in Salem like you were, but I am right behind you age-wise.
At least I got my old uniform.
One thing that we're looking at for our future fight is we'd have no time in our future fight to become risk-adverse individuals. And one of the things I think that makes people risk-adverse is a fear of failure. But the one thing that I've learned throughout my career, I've never learned anything about myself from an easy victory. Now, I've learned a lot from bitter defeat. And we now have this mechanism where we can learn from our errors, from our mistakes, to help develop ourselves into better leaders. Do you have an example of a time that you may have done something or put yourself out there, it did not go well, but you learned from it and were able to rebound?
Only one? And you bring up a good point. And I mean, you and I are about the same age, so we grew up in that era of zero defect, that whole zero defect mentality, and that's the worst thing we can say. Because you're right, we learn more from our failures than we do from our successes. We really do. A couple of things that I can really talk to. We talk about standards in both our services, in the Army and the Air Force, across DoD, right? And we talk, to be a good soldier, to be a good airman, right? You have to follow the standards. So there I was, right? I was a battalion command sergeant major, right? Having been in the Army for a long time. Throughout my career up until that point, I was a 2-pack of cigarettes a day guy, right? So I quit smoking, and I gained a lot of weight, like most people do when they quit smoking. But at that time, right, so, the Army and the Air Force has a weight standard, right? And I can't quote the Air Force regulation. The Army standard, it's not a weight standard, it's actually a body fat standard, right? So, so I was obviously over because I had gained so much weight after quitting smoking. I had gained weight. So I was over my table weight, right? But I was taping out body fat every 6 months for a couple of years, right? Everything was going pretty good. And so, as I said, there I was Command Sergeant Major, just finished the PT test and scored the old APFT on a 300 scale. I just scored like a 260, 270 on the PT test and went to get weighed in. Sure, I was over table weight, so now I'm getting taped. And I'm listening to the soldier taping me, calling off the measurements. And like the only thing going through my head at that point was, I'm going to fail. Right? And that was just listening to the numbers, and I'm trying to do the math in my head, and it's like, I'm going to fail. And, the state command sergeant major at the time had just called me the week before saying that, hey, we're going to move you from the battalion. We're going to move you up to the 79th Troop Command as the CSM. And I'm sitting there going, I can't be a command sergeant major and fail a tape. I just can't be that guy. So it made me look at what I was doing and how I was living. And I made some changes in my life. And so when that happened, and I tell the story to a lot of soldiers that struggle with weight, soldiers and airmen that struggle with weight, that, that happened in October. Right, so now I'm hitting November, right? We're going through Thanksgiving. Everybody loves having a good time at Thanksgiving, right? So December's drill, I come back in, and, even though that Thanksgiving, I still ate kind of, I cut down a little bit, but I still had 2 pieces of pie after dinner that year. But I was able to drop, I think, about 10 pounds that month, all right? Kept on a steady course of watching my diet, watching my exercise, and ultimately was able to drop about 45 pounds. And I've kept it off since then, just by changing my lifestyle and creating that new routine, right? So, that's a personal story on that aspect. It's like, so soldiers and airmen that come to me and say, Sergeant Major, I can't, I struggle, I can't take the weight off. You can. You just have to really really have to work at it sometimes, right? But as I said, and we've all seen it in our careers. It's like, that command sergeant major or that first sergeant or that commander is like, there's no way they make tape, right? And I sat there saying, I don't want to be that leader. So, that's one. And another example of failure, right? And you kind of mentioned it a minute ago when I rolled the dice and put my name in the hat for that tour out in Hawaii. That at least the first month working at the Eastern Pac headquarters, I probably came home at night thinking, what am I doing here? Like, I have no idea, like, what I'm supposed to be doing, what some of this stuff is, how it fits. And at the time, I thought, hey, I'm a command sergeant major, right? Brigade level, I'm pretty good. And I got out there and I didn't know what I didn't know. But it forced me, again, it kind of goes back to getting comfortable, being uncomfortable. Forced me to learn, forced me to grow, which, allowed me to be successful at the end of the day.
Can't be too hard on yourself if you, like you said, you don't know what you don't know. And so the fact that you're willing to even just grow and put yourself out there and eventually, get up to speed. So,
well, that's why, I said earlier, it's like for any non-commissioned officer, regardless of what service you're in, for every non-commissioned officer, it really is that important to get comfortable being uncomfortable because you don't know what you don't know, right? And so when you put yourself into that position where you are uncomfortable and you might, fall on your face or you might stumble, it's okay, right? Learn from it, right? Grow from it, all right? You'll get a better organization and you'll get an experience to show and share with that young soldier or airman that's probably struggling with the same problem that you had 10 years ago.
Which eventually, especially if you're in a senior position and you're able to mentor a CGO, that's that second lieutenant that we're mentioning earlier, and they need that advice, they need that experience, they need that humility, So, thank you just for sharing that. Appreciate it.
And I love your tie-in, your example, and this is what I always try to get out to people about getting out of your comfort zone. You used the example of you had to be uncomfortable dieting over the holidays. You had to up your PT. You had to go through those things to make yourself uncomfortable in an effort to get to where you're at now. And this, this is being a podcast. There's no visual means. For those of you who don't know Sergeant Major Campbell, he is a daily runner and extremely fit. Extremely fit. Looks the part. But you took that uncomfortable aspect and were able to make that transformation. So here's where I want to make that analogy. We have a lot of listeners out there, particularly some of the senior enlisted leaders, some master sergeants, senior master sergeants, and chiefs that have gone through physical transformations like yourself. But they don't realize that they can utilize the same tools, the same resilience, the same mindset to go through the same type of uncomfort, getting out of your comfort zone, and that same drinking from the fire hose. Man, I went from being great to I think I suck back to, hey, I really learned a lot and I developed. The same thing in their professional careers by getting out of that comfort zone, by taking some of those assignments, by going to that class, by making it an AFSC or a change of squadron or whatever. It's the same thing developmentally. And every listener here had to go through something like that in boot camp because very few people go to boot camp or go to their military training in ideal physical shape. We all go and we're totally uncomfortable with the environment and and especially what we're doing in the physical realm, the physical pillar. So I just wanted to foot stamp that analogy for people out there that are listening. What you went through in physically to improve your physique or to improve your run or to lose weight. You take those same tools, you take that same mindset, that same philosophy, that same thing that you're doing and apply it to your career or your development, your leadership development, and find that thing out there that's going to make you uncomfortable and go for it. Additional duty first sergeant all the way up to being on the SOMO bench. For those listeners who don't know what that is, maybe we'll get to it.
Yeah, we can come back to the SOMO bench, but to your point too, and so it's not just about us either, right? It's not just about us looking internally. Right, as non-commissioned officers, we're responsible for our soldiers and airmen, right, for our service members to groom and counsel and shape and mentor them as they're growing up. So it's important for us, to have those uncomfortable conversations with our soldiers and airmen if they're not quite meeting up to the standard, right? And and I know we've talked about this a number of times, and I don't know if it's been a topic on your podcast in the past, Chief. In academia, we have grade inflation, right? In the DoD, we have evaluation inflation, right? And so we, as non-commissioned officers, have to do a better job of that, right? We have to do a better job of telling our soldiers and airmen, hey, you know what? You need to make some improvements in what you're doing, right? You need to get better at this, right? Not everybody's an A. Not everybody's a top block. Right, not everybody's most qualified, right? I remember years ago as a civilian, as a security director, and the HR department was telling me about my evaluations. All had to meet this bell curve, right? That I could only have a certain percentage that were above standards, and I had to have a couple below standards, but. And I remember I was a young security director, right? I'm arguing with the HR department. You don't know my people. It's like, you can't tell me that they all fit into the bell curve. But you know what? Fast forward. It's not a perfect bell curve, but the vast majority of society kind of fits some form of that, right? But I would argue that if you looked at our evaluations across the DoD and across the Massachusetts National Guard, right, that we don't meet that bell curve on our evaluations. I bet you we have a high percentage of, most qualified, best qualified, right? And very few at the needs improvement level, right? But reality says it's like we have soldiers and airmen that need improvement, right? I'm not afraid to admit it. I need them. I'm not perfect at my job. Right, and I don't think you feel like you're perfect in your job.
Not even close.
No. Not even close over here either.
So,
working on it.
We need to do a better job of that.
We do. I'm going to take that as an opportunity to do my Sean Sullivan philosophical foot stomp on what I think evaluations should go. So this is not directive at all. This is just my opinion. I think that evaluations, the process becomes the product. And we're going through that now in the Air Force with the My Eval system and all that, and everybody's worried about the process, and getting so many boxes checked off and then overinflating everything. We're missing what we're trying to do. And you said it right there, trying to develop our people, give them that hard conversation. Leaders, if you're not talking to your people on a drill basis, at least quarterly or semi-annually, you need to be letting them know where they stand because they want to develop and they want to hear bad news. I had an old girlfriend one time who had a puppy, and the puppy would just go and would just piddle on the rug. And she wouldn't scold the puppy. She wouldn't train the puppy. She wouldn't do anything to make the puppy better because it was receiving no guidance, no assistance, no direction. It just kept peeing on the floor. And it got to the point where as it became an adult dog, it just thought that was the place to go to the bathroom. So when she got rid of the dog and gave it to another one of my friends, it went back to that same behavior. And now that person was going to go out and have that dog euthanized. Why? Because the original owner never took the time to have the hard, call it conversation with the puppy, do whatever you need to do to show it that that's not the appropriate behavior. So I guess that's my overall point. My philosophy is to make sure that you are talking to your people, that you are helping them develop, you're giving them hope for a future, you're letting them know how they fit into the organization, and let the process be the process, whatever it is. So.
Yeah, no, and actually, I'm gonna steal a quote. I still have a video that I first saw it when I was a student at the Sergeant Major Academy a million years ago. It was General Schwarzkopf, and I know I'm going to show my age here a little bit. So General Schwarzkopf was one of the commanders in the first Gulf War, right? But he had done a video post-retirement, and one of the things he talked about was, most people, right? Most people, because there's always that one or two. Most people don't get up in the morning, get dressed, and go to work with the intent to fail. Most people don't do that. Most people get up in the morning, they get dressed, and they go to work because they want to succeed. right? So it's our job, right, as non-commissioned officers, set clear, achievable, attainable objectives, right, and to provide honest feedback along the way to get back into that development, to get into that soldier and airman development, right? That allows that soldier and airman to succeed so that they get to a position when they're the next state command chief, right? They've gotten honest feedback along the way, so now they're going to be successful in that position. And they're not going to get in that position going, what's the state command chief do, right? What's the state command sergeant major do?
But what advice would you give to anybody? I know you've dropped a lot of great gems on here, but what advice would you give to anybody that's still trying to pivot? I mean, it's one thing to be uncomfortable, but let's say you're in a jam and you're just like, I have all these different directions that you want to go, that's a good thing. You got good problems, you got good options. But what would you say to anybody that's trying to pivot? Because I know in the Guard, whether Air or Army, you're always having to pivot.
Yeah, so really make a decision. Right? Make a decision. Now, I would encourage every soldier and airman, hey, I'm going to use the word mentor, right? Unfortunately, we throw that word mentorship out, and we use it in a lot of different contexts. It's really not a mentor, but I would encourage everybody to have some kind of mentor, some mentor along the way, somebody that you can turn to that when you're trying to make that decision, right? It comes down to making a decision. But if you're not sure, if you've got 5, 6, 7 different options, do you have somebody that you can turn to, that you trust, that knows you, that you can turn to that individual and say, sir, ma'am, sergeant, this is what I'm thinking about doing. This is why I'm thinking about doing it. What do you think? Is this a good decision, right? Somebody you can turn to give you that advice. And then once you make that decision, run with it, right? And I'm going to go back to something I said earlier, right? So, life is a series of decisions, right? And I go back and I said it a minute ago that I wish at some point, somebody had kicked young Specialist Campbell or young Sergeant Campbell in the butt and said, go do something different, go try something different. I'm like, yeah, there's a part of me that wishes that, right? But there's a part of me that says, because life is a series of decisions, had some non-commissioned officer kicked me in the butt 30 years ago and told me to go do something different, I wouldn't be sitting here talking with you, Sergeant Whitaker, Chief Sullivan, right? Maybe, but probably not, because my life would have taken a different turn. My career would have taken a different path. And I might have been doing something else. I might have ended up going to flight school, which is why I first joined the Guard and chose not to take the test, right? I may have gone off to flight school, in which case I'd probably be long retired by now. Who knows? But really, circling back to answer your question, make the decision, right? Have a support group, have a mentor that you can turn to, but make the decision and then run with it. Don't be afraid to stumble a little bit, because we're all going to stumble, right? We're all going to fall. Dust yourself up, get back in the saddle, and keep on running.
Thank you.
Sergeant Major, I want to thank you for joining us here today. And before we wrap up, is there anything that you wanted to get out to our audience, or anything that you wanted to put out?
Chief, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. It's a great opportunity. Definitely a great opportunity to be down here at the 102nd Intel Wing to learn about what you all are doing and for the Commonwealth and for our nation. For all of your listeners out there, that whether you're still serving in uniform or whether you've hung it up for the last time, thank you for what you do, right? Thank you for coming to work every day, serving the Commonwealth, serving our nation. I encourage you all to look to your left and right. Again, whether you're still serving or whether you have served, you had some great experiences. I've had some great experiences, in my 40-year career, right? Who's next, right? Who's coming behind you, right? Who have you prepared to take your job, to take your role, right? To carry the Massachusetts Guard, to carry our Army or our Air Force, right? For the next 10 or 20 years. Something to think about.
I look forward to doing a lot more wing visits with you, and also spending some time with you visiting some armories. And I look forward to the next couple of years we're going to have together, and I appreciate you coming on here. Sergeant Whitaker, thank you again. Always appreciate coming in and having you guide me through hosting these things.
I just sit back and listen, Chief. It's just there's a lot of information to pick up. So thank you for having me again.
And I just want to end with, it's kind of like a little quote of something that just resonated with me, and I wanted to put it out. And I actually got this off a T-shirt, of all things. So sometimes the greatest wisdom you can get off of a T-shirt or a bumper sticker, and it says, never underestimate your impact and influence on somebody else. Be their reason. Just something that resonated with me and wanted to pass on to the collective. So thank you for joining us, and we will see you on our next episode of Chevrons.